He mocked a 17-year-old girl in front of the entire garage, then watched in stunned silence as she fixed the engine no one else could touch. "Tell your daughter to stay out of the way. This ain't a classroom." That's the first thing Wesley Trask ever said to Donovan Morton. No hello, no handshake. Just that, loud enough for the entire garage crew to hear. Donovan didn't flinch. He'd worked under enough cocky owners to know when to keep his cool. His daughter, though, 17-year-old Jalaiah, she caught it. She heard every syllable, but she didn't react. Didn't even look up from the rusted-out Aston Martin V12 parked near Bay 3. She was there to hang with her dad, maybe get some hands-on time with a rare engine. She wasn't expecting to be a target. The garage was a big one, all glass fronts and polished concrete, tucked into a side street in Tempe, Arizona, where the desert heat made even the shadows feel hot. Donovan had been working at Trask Automotive Restorations for over 5 years. He had a rep as someone who could rebuild a carburetor in his sleep, but the new boss didn't seem to care about that. Wesley Trask had inherited the place from his father 2 months earlier and made it clear from day one he wanted a new energy. By new energy, apparently, he meant fewer old hands and definitely no girls in the garage. That Saturday morning started off slow. Donovan was tightening down a timing belt when Jalaiah wandered closer, wiping her hands with a shop rag. She'd been watching a group of mechanics arguing over a V12 that hadn't started in weeks. "I think that sensor's wired backwards," she said, half under her breath. The laughter hit quick and hard. One of the guys, slim build, ball cap turned backward, grinned. "We got ourselves a technician here, huh?" Another added, "She wants to tell us how to fix the Ferrari, too." Donovan looked over, his mouth opening. But before he could say anything, Trask stepped in, that fake smile energy radiating off him. "Actually," he said, "let's give her a shot." The whole shop went quiet. "You serious?" one of the guys said. Trask nodded. "Let's see what the Prodigy's got. You think that sensor's off? Great, go ahead, fix it. If you're right, I'll personally clean the shop floor with a toothbrush." He was joking, of course. Or maybe he wasn't. Either way, he thought he'd just won the room. Jalaiah looked at her dad. Donovan was watching her, unsure. He knew his daughter's skills. She'd been shadowing him since she was old enough to lift a socket wrench. But this wasn't their garage at home. This was different. "You don't have to," he muttered. "I know," she said. Then she walked over to the Ferrari. Everyone stepped back. She pulled her long braids behind her shoulder, grabbed a pair of gloves off the rack, and popped the hood. The whole thing hissed slightly as it opened, revealing the messy, half-rebuilt chaos underneath. Tubing, wiring, engine mounts, half of it looked like a maze designed to confuse. "You might want to let her watch a YouTube tutorial first," someone whispered. Another mechanic chuckled. Trask crossed his arms and leaned against a post. "Take your time," he said. "We've only spent 3 weeks on that thing." Jalaiah didn't say a word. She leaned in, her eyes scanning everything with the kind of quiet intensity that made people nervous. It wasn't just confidence. It was focus, deep and unshakable. She started gently moving wires aside, inspecting the mounts, pressing lightly on certain connections to test for give. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Trask asked, loud enough again for everyone. "Listening," she replied, barely audible. "This thing's been touched by too many hands. Someone rerouted your ignition feed to the wrong path. Sensor thinks it's reading 12 volts, but it's barely hitting 8. That got everyone's attention. One of the older guys raised an eyebrow. "She's guessing." "Maybe," another added. But she didn't even flinch. Donovan stepped a little closer, but didn't say anything. Jalaiah gently removed the primary harness from its socket, pulled out her phone flashlight, and crouched to trace the line. "She's serious," someone muttered. Trask's face twisted just slightly. "Okay, genius. If you think you've got the fix, you've got 20 minutes. Jalaiah stood up. "I won't need that long." But Trask had no idea what kind of storm he'd just invited into his shop. You could feel the mood shift, even without saying a word. The moment Jalaiah said she wouldn't need 20 minutes, a hush slid across the garage. Not respect, not yet. Just tension. A few eyebrows lifted, some arms crossed. They were watching now, not just mocking. Jalaya kept her eyes on the engine. The Ferrari's V12 wasn't just complex, it was surgical. European imports like this one weren't forgiving. One mistaken rewiring, one misread sensor, and you'd spend hours chasing your own shadow. She called out calmly, "Can someone pass me a T15? No one moved. Then a single tool clinked onto the metal table nearby. It was Reese. Short, wiry, always chewing gum, and usually the loudest in the room. He'd made jokes earlier, but now he was watching her differently. "I want to see where this goes," he muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. Jalaya took the screwdriver without a thank you, not out of rudeness, but because her head was already in the wiring harness. Her movements were fast but controlled. No fumbling, no second guessing. Trask leaned against a hydraulic lift, arms folded like a judge in a courtroom. "You touched the wrong line. That car goes into lockout. You short it. It's 20 grand of fried sensors." Jalaya didn't even glance at him. Maybe that's why you should have read the diagram. That line hit harder than a wrench drop. Someone let out a surprised snort, quickly muffled. Donovan didn't move, didn't smile, didn't scowl. But his hands were clenched in front of him, like holding them together kept him from stepping in. She unplugged the faulty connector, blew out a fine layer of dust, and began inspecting the pins. The engine bay was tight, the kind of space where even experienced hands struggled. But Jalaya wasn't struggling. She was moving with a sense of rhythm, like she knew what was coming 3 steps ahead. She pulled a small multimeter from her backpack, her own, not borrowed, and clipped it to the leads. Reese tilted his head. "Where'd she even learn this stuff?" Donovan finally spoke. "Garage at home. Been messing with engines since she was a kid. And none of y'all thought to tell us she was basically a walking repair manual?" someone said. Donovan shrugged. Didn't think it was relevant. The tension was breaking, but just a little. What replaced it wasn't comfort. It was curiosity. Even the ones who rolled their eyes before were inching closer, peeking over shoulders, watching her hands like they were tuning forks. Trask walked toward her slowly. "Let's be clear," he said, voice sharp. "If you screw this up, you take full responsibility." Jalaya didn't even look at him. "Sure. If I fix it, do you take full responsibility for wasting 3 weeks?" That one hit too. Reese actually laughed out loud this time. Trask's face tightened. "We'll see." "Y'all ever think maybe the issue wasn't the machine?" Jalaya asked, not sarcastically. Just matter of fact. Maybe the issue was how you were looking at it. She gently twisted the connector into place and secured it with a fresh clip. Then, without fanfare, she stood up and brushed her palms together. There was grease on her wrist, a light streak across her cheek. She didn't care. "Now it's reading 9.8 volts. Still low, but stable." Reese blinked. "How the hell—" "You reversed the flow from the secondary relay," she said simply. It was starving itself. The words didn't mean much to the non-techs in the room, but to the ones who knew wiring, it made perfect sense. Someone whispered, "I never even thought of checking that." A mechanic in his 40s leaned against a bench, staring hard. "I rewired that relay." "Yeah," Jalaya said, not unkindly. "And it's not your fault. This layout's backwards compared to most models. Easy to miss." For the first time, there was no sarcasm in the room. Just quiet. Jalaya called out, "I need one more thing. Someone turn the key to ignition, but don't try to start it." Donovan moved first, slipping into the driver's seat. "Let me." A second later, the dashboard blinked. Clean. Clear. No error codes. "Whoa," Reese murmured. Everyone leaned in. "Just wait," Jalaya said. But none of them were ready for what would happen next. The silence in the garage was thick now. Not tense, not mocking, just still. Every eye was on Jalaya, every breath held as she ducked back under the hood. "All right," she said. "Now that the relays are straight, I need to reprogram the idle mapping. Your ECU's running factory defaults. It doesn't match the airflow mods someone added." "Who told her about the airflow mods?" One guy muttered. "She figured that out?" someone else asked. Jalaya didn't answer. She was already plugging a cord into the diagnostic port and opening a small app on her phone. It wasn't some flashy tool with logos, just lines of numbers, raw code, Adjustment settings she began scrolling through like someone reading sheet music. "You can reprogram that from your phone?" Reese asked. "Remotely, yeah," she replied, eyes still focused. "It's not ideal, but it's faster." Wesley Trask scoffed, pacing behind her now. "We've had trained techs with full laptop rigs try that exact thing. Didn't do a damn thing." "They weren't reading the correction table right," Jalaya said simply. "They forced a throttle offset without recalibrating the airflow ratio." Trask blinked. He didn't respond this time. He didn't know how. "All right," she said. "I'm going to reset the idle slope to 7.2. Then I'm cutting the cold start injection delay by 2 seconds." She pressed a button. Click. The dash lights fluttered again. Donovan looked up from the steering wheel. "No warning lights," he said. "Now try to crank it," she called. He turned the key. The engine whirred, whined, and stopped. "Again." He did. Same result. The sound was stronger now, almost responsive, but not quite firing. Someone in the back said, "Almost had it." Jalaya frowned. Not frustrated. "Just thinking. The secondary coil," she muttered. "It's misaligned." "You sure?" Donovan asked. "No," she admitted. "But I'm not leaving it like this." She walked back to the bay and grabbed a small socket set. The mechanic stepped aside now, not laughing, not questioning, just giving her room. She opened the ignition housing, adjusted the coil seating, and tightened it gently, her fingers quick and steady. Every movement was practiced. Muscle memory. She didn't hesitate, didn't backtrack. It wasn't showy, just precise. "What's she even doing now?" Trask asked, more to himself than anyone else. "Fixing what we missed," Reese answered. She nodded at her dad. "Try it one more time." He turned the key. This time, the Ferrari didn't just cough. It chugged. A deep, raw churn that built into a pulse. The whole garage vibrated as the V12 finally came to life, idling low and mean, like a beast that had just woken up from a long nap. Everyone froze. Trask stared like he'd just seen a ghost. Reese stepped forward slowly, eyes wide. "That thing hasn't made a sound in 24 days. Jalaya didn't smile. She just turned toward Trask. "You wanted it to run." "It's running," he didn't answer. Another mechanic leaned down and looked at the display. "Throttle response is clean. Temps stable." "Check the AFR," Jalaya said. He did. 12.7. She's dead on. Now the shop was alive, but in a different way. Mechanics were whispering, shaking heads, some even grinning. Not at her, but at the fact that something finally worked. Trask didn't look happy. He looked stunned, like someone who'd been handed the truth in a language he never bothered to learn. Donovan stepped out of the car and just stood there for a second, staring at the engine. He finally turned to her. "I didn't even teach you that coil trick." "You did," she said. "You just didn't know I was watching." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You always watching." Someone clapped from the back. A slow, single clap. Then another joined. It wasn't loud. Not a movie moment. Just real people, genuinely surprised. Trask spoke finally. That doesn't mean you're some kind of expert." "I never said I was," Jalaya replied. "You're the one who made it a dare." But there was more she hadn't said. Things that would make their jaws drop even harder. For a few long seconds, nobody said anything. The engine purred behind Jalaya, like it had been waiting on her this whole time, but she didn't look at it. Her eyes were locked on Trask. The garage owner cleared his throat, like he needed to reset the power dynamic. "Fixing one engine doesn't mean you know what you're doing." No one laughed. Not this time. Donovan stepped in then, voice low but sharp. "You challenged her, Wes." She answered. "Yeah, well," Trask muttered, adjusting the cuffs on his shirt. "Maybe she got lucky." "Luck doesn't rewire relays or reprogram ECUs," Reese said. "You saw it. We all did." Trask's jaw tensed. He was losing control of the room, and he knew it. He glanced around like he was searching for someone to back him up. But the faces looking back weren't so eager anymore. Jalaya didn't bother trying to defend herself. She wasn't here for applause. She unplugged her phone from the diagnostic port and wiped her hands again. "I wasn't trying to prove anything." she said. You put me on the spot. I just didn't want my dad to look bad. That landed harder than she intended. Donovan looked at her, not surprised, just proud in that quiet way dads sometimes are when they don't need to say it out loud. Reese folded his arms and looked at Trask. She's the first person in this garage who didn't overthink that engine. She just saw the problem and fixed it. Yeah, said another mechanic, older guy with oil-stained boots and a permanent squint. Been working 30 years, and I missed the same stuff she caught in 15 minutes. Trask tried to brush it off. Okay, so she's got a sharp eye. Doesn't mean she's trained. Didn't say she was. Jalaiah replied. But neither were half the guys you hired. That one cut clean. The silence returned. Tense, then thoughtful. Donovan nodded once. She's been helping me rebuild engines in the backyard for years. I thought it was just a hobby at first. Then she started fixing things I didn't even know were broken. Reese asked, Wait, how long's she been doing this? Jalaiah looked up. Since I was 12. Someone let out a soft whistle. Trask turned toward her again, this time quieter. So, you're saying you've been self-taught? I watched my dad. Asked questions. Took things apart. Put them back. Messed up a lot. Learned more from that than anything else. Another mechanic chuckled. That's how most of us learned. She's one of us whether you like it or not. Trask didn't respond. He didn't have to. His face said enough. This wasn't how he pictured the day going. Not by a long shot. The engine behind them continued its steady rhythm, loud but smooth, alive. Jalaiah turned away from Trask and back toward the bay, scanning the engine one last time. You're still going to want to change the oil before you run it too long. Sitting that long, the viscosity's probably garbage. Reese laughed. She's not wrong. Then someone else asked the question that had been building since the moment the engine turned over. You ever think about doing this for real? Jalaiah blinked. What do you mean? Like, making it your job. Full time. There's shops that'd pay for hands like yours. Donovan glanced at her, curious what she'd say. Jalaiah shrugged. Maybe. I like building stuff. I like when things that don't work finally click. You got a gift, Reese said. Trask muttered something under his breath, but nobody asked him to repeat it. That was when another mechanic, a younger guy named Victor, pointed toward the corner. You didn't bring a laptop. You fixed that thing with your phone. What else you got in that backpack? Jalaiah smiled. Just a little. A tablet. 2 diagnostic apps. An old coil I've been rewiring. And some sandwiches. The room actually laughed this time. Real laughter. No sarcasm. No disbelief. But before they could settle into comfort, Jalaiah was about to drop something that would flip their understanding of her completely. Reese leaned against the workbench, still chuckling. Sandwiches too? You came fully loaded. Jalaiah gave a quiet smirk, but didn't say much else. She was still scanning the engine, her mind clearly ticking through every variable, every potential flaw. It was like her eyes didn't see a machine. They saw a conversation, a rhythm. And right now, it was speaking to her just fine. Victor stepped closer, peering into the engine bay like it had just grown wings. I've never seen this thing idle so smooth. Last guy said the timing chain might have jumped. Nope, Jalaiah said. Timing was fine. It just didn't know when to breathe. Reese turned to Donovan. You must be real proud. Donovan looked over at his daughter, nodding slowly. I've always been proud. But this is hers. The room was warming up to her, slowly, like thawing metal. But Trask wasn't done. He stepped forward, clearing his throat, that tight smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He was trying to regain control. All right, impressive. Sure, he said. But I've seen flashes of talent before. Doesn't mean she's ready for the real thing. Jalaiah turned to face him. You think this wasn't real? He shrugged. One job doesn't mean much in the long run. Reese cut in. Come on, man. We've been tearing our hair out for weeks. She walks in, takes a look, and makes it run. That's not luck. That's skill. Whatever, Trask muttered. Let's not act like she's Einstein. Jalaiah stepped around the car and pulled a folded envelope from her backpack, already smudged with grease. She handed it to Reese. He raised an eyebrow, opened it slowly, and let out a low whistle. No way. What? Another mechanic asked. He turned the letter around. It had the Massachusetts Institute of Technology letterhead on top and a clear line halfway down the page. Full academic scholarship awarded based on mechanical engineering assessment and independent project submission. Victor's mouth dropped open. You got into MIT? Jalaya nodded. They offered the scholarship last month. I submitted a design for a modular combustion engine with 30% less waste output. Built the prototype from scrap. For once, the garage didn't have a sound. Even the engine idled quieter than before. Trask looked at the letter, eyes scanning. But he didn't say a word. You submitted it at 17? Reese asked. Jalaya nodded. Used the parts my dad's customers left behind. One of the older guys scratched his chin. So you built your own engine? On your own time? In your backyard? Yup. Reese held up the letter like it was proof of some hidden legend. Why didn't you lead with this? Jalaya gave a small shrug. Didn't think I had to. The whole garage was different now. The skepticism had cracked. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked amazed. Trask looked like someone who'd bet against the wrong hand and knew it. Donovan stepped forward again. She's not trying to prove herself. She's just doing what she loves. Reese walked over to Trask, shaking his head. She's more qualified than half of us, and none of us even saw it. Trask tried to brush it off. Still doesn't mean she's ready for pressure. She was under pressure, Reese snapped. You made this a dare. She turned it into a lesson. The engine was still purring, steady and warm. A perfect contrast to the tension Trask couldn't hide anymore. Victor grinned. Man, if MIT's already calling her, I can't wait to see where she ends up in 5 years. She's already ahead of most college grads, Reese added. Donovan turned to his daughter. Want to tell them what you've been doing on weekends? Jalaya hesitated, then shrugged. Fixing lawnmowers, rebuilding go-karts, some freelance coding. Freelance coding? Victor blinked. I built my own scan tool, she said. Wrote the software from scratch. The room erupted into low whistles and mutters again. There was no doubting it anymore. This girl wasn't just a rare find. She was something most of them had never even seen coming. But the respect wasn't the only thing changing. Some of these men were starting to reflect on themselves in ways they hadn't in years. Wesley Trask stood with his arms still crossed, but the confidence he wore earlier had slipped. He was watching Jalaya the way someone watches a storm they thought would pass them by, until it parks right overhead. She didn't look at him again. Didn't need to. Her work had already spoken louder than anything she could say. One mechanic, Rick, quiet guy, mid-40s, the kind who'd seen 100 apprentices come and go, finally broke the silence. You're gonna make it out there. Not just 'cause you're smart, but 'cause you stayed calm when we all doubted you. Jalaya didn't respond right away. She looked down at her hands, grease still on her knuckles. I've gotten used to it. Rick frowned. To what? People not expecting much, she said. Looking at me like I'm supposed to stay small. Be quiet. Not take up too much space. Reese stepped closer, wiping his hands with a shop towel. They do that to everybody at some point. Maybe, she said. But not like this. That stopped him. Not because he didn't get it, but because he did. Trask scoffed lightly. You're making this about something it's not. Jalaya met his eyes finally. No, you did that when you turned my dad into a joke just for bringing me here. Donovan shifted beside her. Not defensive, just present. She didn't need protecting, but he was always going to stand behind her. Reese muttered, She's got a point. Victor chimed in. Wes, she didn't ask for this. You made it a show. Now you're upset the ending ain't yours. The tension cracked a little more. Trask looked at the ground, jaw tight. But even he knew arguing now would only make it worse. Rick leaned on a tool cart. You know, when I first started here, I had a foreman who said, You don't learn nothing from the guys who think they know it all. You learn from the ones who still ask questions. She asked the right ones. Jalaya gave a small nod of appreciation. Reese chuckled. I remember when I thought I was hot stuff just for syncing an automatic transmission with a flashlight and a prayer. She's out here programming ECUs and building engines like it's summer camp. someone else added. And not once did she show off. That's rare. It wasn't admiration Jalaiah was after. But now that it was there, it didn't feel fake. It felt earned. Donovan turned to her again, pride written all over his face. You've been quiet your whole life. But when something's broken, you speak loud. Jalaiah smiled, just barely. Rhys looked at her like he was thinking hard about something. You know, we talk about respect in here all the time, but we don't always show it to the right people. That changes today. Even Trask didn't try to push back. He stayed quiet, eyes low. Let's just be real, Rhys continued. If she wanted to walk in here tomorrow and work side by side with us, she could. She'd hold her own better than half the guys we've seen come and go. She's not coming back, Donovan said. She's got bigger things ahead. That hung in the air for a moment. The engine hummed again, perfectly tuned. Victor laughed softly. I'm still stuck on the fact she fixed it with a phone and a backpack. Jalaiah looked around the room. You guys are good at what you do, but you get used to doing things one way. And sometimes the problem isn't the engine. It's the way you've been taught to look at it. That landed heavy. No one laughed. No one joked. Just quiet understanding. Rhys clapped his hands once, breaking the moment. All right, let's shut it down before it eats the gas. Donovan leaned in and turned off the ignition. The engine clicked softly, cooling in the silence. Jalaiah stepped back, peeling off her gloves. Thanks for letting me touch it, she said to no one in particular. Victor grinned. Nah. Thanks for showing us what we missed. But before they could ask what she planned to do next, she made it clear. She had no intention of slowing down. Rhys leaned against the wall, arms crossed, chewing the inside of his cheek. So what's next for you? He asked. Jalaiah took a moment. The shop lights buzzed softly above, the air thick with the scent of oil and metal. She looked around, not just at the car she'd brought back to life, but at the men who had watched her do it. Some were still shocked. A few were embarrassed. All of them were different than when she first walked in. I graduate in a few months, she said. Then I'll head out to Cambridge for the summer program before the fall semester. MIT's lucky to have you, Victor said. She smiled, a small, tired smile. I used to think I had to prove I belonged in places like that. And now? Rick asked. Jalaiah looked him in the eye. Now I know I do, whether anyone else thinks so or not. Rhys whistled. That right there. That's why she's gonna make it. Donovan stood beside her, arms relaxed for the first time all morning. Tried to tell you all, he said with a shrug. This girl's been ahead of the curve since she was 15, rebuilding transmissions for fun. Trask cleared his throat. Everyone turned to him. She's got skill, he said, voice lower now. No doubt about it. It wasn't exactly praise, but it wasn't a denial either. Jalaiah nodded once. Appreciate that. Trask looked at Donovan, then at her. If you ever want to work in a shop, after school or something, let me know. There's a spot. That caught a few guys off guard. Donovan didn't respond. He looked at his daughter instead. Jalaiah paused. Thanks, but I've got other plans. It wasn't said with arrogance, just truth. She didn't owe anyone a compromise. Rick nodded. Respect. Victor laughed softly. Can't blame her. Shops like this aren't always the easiest place to grow. Jalaiah turned to her dad. We heading out? Yeah, he said, grabbing a towel and wiping his hands. Let's beat the heat before it hits triple digits. As they walked toward the bay doors, Rhys jogged after them. Hey, before you go. They stopped. Rhys held up his hand like he was about to say something wise, then lowered it again. Just don't forget us when you're building rocket ships or whatever. Jalaiah smiled. You fix a Ferrari. You don't forget the garage. Victor called from behind him. You're a mechanic, Jalaiah, no matter what degree they give you. She paused at the door. Maybe, but I think I'm something else too. What's that? Rhys asked. A builder, she said. Of engines, of ideas, maybe even of better ways to treat people. That sat heavy in the air. Not preachy, just honest. Donovan opened the passenger door for her. An old habit. She slid in, backpack slung across her chest, the letter from MIT sticking slightly from the zipper. As Donovan started the truck, the roar of the V12 still echoed faintly behind them. They didn't speak for a few minutes. Then he asked, "You think they'll treat the next girl different?" Jalaiah leaned back in her seat. "I think some of them will. And the others? They'll learn." But even as the truck pulled away, what they left behind in that shop was more than a repaired engine. It was a mirror, showing every man in there something they hadn't expected to see. The next Monday, the garage didn't sound the same. The usual morning banter was quieter, more measured. No one brought up football scores, no one tossed around casual jabs. Something had shifted, and everyone felt it, even if they didn't all know how to name it. Reese was the first to say it out loud. Mid-morning, leaning over the hood of a 1972 Mustang, he looked up at Victor. "I can't stop thinking about Saturday." Victor nodded, not taking his eyes off the carburetor. "Same." "She made us all look kinda stiff, huh?" "Nah," Victor said. "She made us look like we stopped learning." That stuck. Not an insult. Just the truth, hanging there between two grown men used to being the smartest in the room when it came to machines. Rick walked by with a torque wrench, overhearing the tail end. "She didn't shame us. She showed us how far we could go." Even Trask had been quiet since the incident. He came in that morning, didn't bark orders, didn't hover behind the younger techs like usual. He walked the floor slower, stopping every so often to glance at the Ferrari that now sat fully repaired, its cover drawn back just enough to show it wasn't forgotten. And though he'd never admit it out loud, he'd stayed late Sunday night, staring at the diagnostic logs she'd generated. The numbers didn't lie. The code was tight. The fix was clean. She wasn't lucky. She knew what she was doing. Back in Bay 2, Reese grabbed a rag and wiped his hands. "You know, I was always taught this trade was about repetition. Do it until your hands don't forget." But watching her, she didn't just repeat. She thought. Every move had purpose. Victor laughed under his breath. "Made me realize how lazy I've gotten with the good enough fixes." That was it. Not shame. Just reflection. A kind none of them were used to in a space built more for noise than honesty. Rick leaned on the wall nearby. What stuck with me the most? She wasn't trying to prove anything. She just didn't want her dad to be embarrassed. That got a few nods. Even the youngest tech, Jameer, barely out of trade school, looked up from his notes. "She's probably younger than me, and I'm out here Googling how to reset a throttle body." Reese chuckled. "We all do that. Don't feel bad." "But she made it look like instinct," Jameer said. "Like it was part of her, and maybe it was." Later that afternoon, Trask called Donovan into his office. No threats, no warnings, just a quiet request to talk. Donovan stepped inside, wiped his boots before crossing the threshold, like always. He sat down without being told. "I was wrong," Trask said, not looking him in the eye. Donovan didn't move. "I shouldn't have challenged her like that. Shouldn't have challenged you either. She's sharp. Probably sharper than anyone I've met under 30. Donovan nodded once. "She is." Trask exhaled. "You raised her right." "Didn't raise her to fix engines. She just picked that up herself. I know talent when I see it," Trask said. "And she's got it." Donovan stood. "She's got more than talent. She's got patience. And the kind of focus that doesn't come from wanting to impress anyone." Trask leaned back in his chair. "Think she'll ever come back here?" "No," Donovan said. "But that's not the point, is it?" Trask shook his head slowly. "No, it's not." Outside the office, Reese passed by and spotted Donovan coming out. "Everything cool?" "Yeah," Donovan said, adjusting his cap. "Better than it was." Reese smiled. "You tell her we're rooting for her?" Donovan stopped. "You should tell her yourself." That idea stayed in Reese's head all day. But before the week was out, someone at the garage would take that idea and turn it into something more. Friday came fast. The heat in Tempe was already climbing past 95 degrees by noon, and the shop fans weren't doing much but moving the sweat around. Still, there was a different kind of energy in the air. Low-key, steady, like the shop had finally taken a breath it didn't know it was holding. At around 2 p.m., Reese stepped outside with a box in his hands. Small, plain, nothing fancy. Inside was a framed photo someone had printed from the garage's security footage. Jalaiah, arms deep in the Ferrari's engine bay, with that sharp, laser-focused look on her face. Below it, a plaque read, "The day we learned again." He brought it into the break room and set it on the wall, right above the cracked coffee machine no one had ever bothered to fix. A few of the guys gathered around. "That from Saturday?" Rick asked. Reese nodded. "We're not forgetting it." Victor walked in next. He stared at the photo for a long second. "She didn't even know we were watching like that." "Exactly," Reese said. "That's what made it real." Back at home, Jalaiah sat cross-legged on the garage floor with a half-rebuilt motorbike between her knees. The heat didn't bother her. She was used to it. She liked the noise of tools clinking, the grit under her nails, the way the engine told you what it needed if you just listened close enough. Donovan stepped out with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Thought you might need something cold." "Thanks," she said, wiping her brow. He handed her the glass, then leaned against the tool chest. "He called you sharp." "Who?" she asked. "Trask. Said you're sharper than most people he's ever met." Jalaiah snorted. "Doesn't change how he acted." "No," Donovan agreed. "But it means he's thinking about it. That's something." She sipped her drink, then set it down beside a box of spark plugs. "You think they'll remember me?" "I think they'll remember what you showed them." "And what was that?" "That they've got more to learn." That answer sat between them, heavy and right. A few days later, Reese stopped by their house. He didn't call ahead, just showed up in his beat-up Silverado with a manila envelope under one arm. Donovan opened the door. "Well, look who it is. Just wanted to drop something off," Reese said. "Won't take a minute." Jalaiah came to the door, hands still greasy from her rebuild. "This is for you," Reese said, handing her the envelope. She opened it. Inside was a certificate, printed on thick paper, the Trask Automotive logo faint in the background. Across the top it read, "Honorary Lead Technician, Jalaiah Morton," below it, in a sharp black font. "For technical excellence, leadership under pressure, and reminding us all why we started turning wrenches in the first place." Her eyes scanned the paper slowly. She didn't say much, just looked up and said, "Thank you." Reese scratched his chin. "Most people spend years trying to earn something like that." "I wasn't trying to earn anything," she said. "I know," he replied. "That's why it matters." They stood there a moment longer before she said, "You didn't have to do this." Reese looked her in the eye. "We did." After he left, Jalaiah pinned the certificate on the corkboard in her room, right above her MIT letter, right next to her first spark plug rebuild tag from 3 years ago. Not because she needed validation, but because it reminded her that change is possible, even in places that never asked for it. She didn't go back to Trask Automotive. She didn't need to. What happened there had already done its work. The guys in that garage? They started asking more questions, started listening more, started thinking twice before talking down to the next kid who looked different or thought different or showed up with her own tools. And Trask? He stopped pretending to know everything. He hired his first female apprentice 2 months later. Not because he wanted a headline, but because no one rolled their eyes when the idea came up. They were ready. As for Jalaiah, she kept building. Engines, machines, her future, piece by piece, wire by wire. Because when someone dares you to prove yourself, you've got 2 choices. Step back, or show them who you already were. She didn't prove herself that day. She revealed herself. If this story hit something in you, if it made you rethink what talent looks like, make sure you subscribe. More stories like this are coming. And maybe one of them will be yours.